These are my props. I think I'll stay here. I was originally going to roam the stage, but I think I'll stay here. I have this presentation. I'm going to start by just telling you a little bit about Filtrix and what we stand for. We've been doing the application and utilization of compost for over 10 years in the United States. So we are truly pioneers in the application. And what I'm going to show you, we'll start off a little bit about the trends in the use. So we're at that end, but we're not compost producers. We are the people that enable and empower people who produce compost to use it for the benefit of society and our communities. So I'm going to start off talking a little bit about that and the trends that are going on and what drives the utilization of compost. And then we'll go into pictures, photographs of all the different types of applications that you can use compost. Not only using it alone, but with seed, vegetation, supported vegetation, and primarily Filtrix is noted for its use of socks. Similar to the socks that you have on your feet, except in this case we fill it with compost. And we're going to show you all the different ways you can move composted growing media and filter media to solve all kinds of problems in the environment and in agriculture, and how to grow food media. The perfect storm. The background or the context of the global issues we face, not only in the United States, but literally globally, is that we have 7 billion people on Earth. 2/3 of our nation's topsoil has eroded. Dr. Cordova pointed that out. We have serious problems with the quality of our soils. Food safety, security, and nutritional value. Locally produced food versus food factories. Clean, drinkable, swimmable, and fishable waters. Energy, the Marcellus and the Utica shale drilling in the eastern part of the United States is a big production area for oil and propane in the United States. How do we protect our environment from the detrimental effects of that drilling and mining that we do in our environment? And then man-made versus natural. So National Geographic highlighted just how many people we are talking about feeding and caring for in this planet in 2011, and it continues to grow. The consumer values are also changing along with the population. We are moving from a globally available consumer to more locally grown products and services. Conventionally grown using agrochemicals to certified organic. Expansion, meaning we keep growing and growing without thinking about how are we going to sustain that growth. To now we're saying, gee, we better start focusing on how we're going to sustain and maybe manage that growth so the quality of our life doesn't deteriorate. Temporary compliance, just fixing a problem temporarily, versus low-impact development, which simply means, low-impact development means taking land that we have changed, like we put a new building up, we remove all the vegetation, then we build the building. Now what do we have? We have concrete, asphalt, things that don't act like nature would act. So what we do with low-impact development is we return that land to what it, as close as possible to what it was before we removed all the vegetation. So low-impact development, another word for it, the EPA will use the word green infrastructure. Infrastructure that's green and living. Plants, think plants. Botany. And then the last one, man-made, natural. And what we do at Filtrix is we do not reinvent nature. We let nature do what it can because nature can do what we cannot do. We work with nature, we cooperate with nature, because in working with nature, there's a lot of free benefits that come to us if we learn how to do that. So can man do it alone? Clean Water Act. Do we have clean water? We certainly don't in the United States. We're still working on it. We're getting better. Clean Air Act. Do we have clean air? We're getting better. We have less smog, but we still have to continually, as that population grows, work on these. Then Clean Soils Act. What about that one? And what we do and what chemicals we put into our soils and why they do not produce consistently over a sustained period as well as they did in the past. Our opportunity then is for man to do what nature cannot. That would be impressive. How can we work with nature to literally enhance what nature would do on its own? What nature cannot do? Well, nature cannot convert waste into compost in 3 months. It'll take more like 6 months or longer, but we can turn that pile, we can water it, add water to it, and speed the process of decomposition and produce compost faster than nature would do on its own. We can collect garbage and compost 70% of it. So we can collect our waste. Nature won't do it, they'll just leave it there. So that's up to us. We can use compost to garden on rooftops, pavement, gravel, or even poor soils. And we're going to show you how we do that. We can provide a weed-free growing medium, compost. We can contain loose compost for growing and stormwater applications, and we do that using socks. Bottom line is, we need easy. If it's not easy, human beings will not adapt it and adopt it. We will just ignore it. So Filtrix compost socks. That's what this is here. This is made with a woven polypropylene material. This here is one made with 100% natural cotton fibers. We use both of them. This one will biodegrade and turn into compost on its own without ever having to touch it after you've installed it. This one here allows us to move the products around the compost mulch and the compost growing media to where we need it and reuse it on additional job sites. So, for example, in construction, they will use this on the construction site. After 12 months, they'll pick it up, put it on a pallet, and move it to another construction site and reuse it as long as it's continuing to filter. Now, I should mention that compost socks are different than things like, some of you may be familiar with straw wattles, or what they call fiber rolls. Straw wattles or fiber rolls are tubes in a plastic mesh stuffed with rice straw or some other grass-like material. The difference between a compost sock, which uses a composted mulch, 2-inch minus mulch, like a landscape mulch, versus a straw wattle, is that this will filter the water and clean it as it filters through the mulch, where a straw wattle will block the water and then the sediment deposits behind the straw wattle. So it's more of a speed bump to stop the water and slow it down. This actually is a biofilter. When we put it in a sock, we have created a natural biofilter. So, it has been accepted and tested extensively. I have just one book here, but there are some publications back there from the US EPA has a website, the USDA also, and the US Army Corps of Engineers have all tested the use of compost socks and approved it and encourage people to use them. Why? Because they work, and because they also help us utilize and take what we used to call a waste product and use it as a valuable resource to increase the value of compost because we know how to use it. So it's the newest innovation in agriculture, erosion, and sediment control. Yet, some have not heard about the technology. That is why I am here. How many of you have heard about compost socks? Anybody? 1, 2. Exactly. And Do you know that's pretty much the case even in the United States? The vast majority of people I talk to, even though we've been around for 10 years, don't know we exist. So that's why I'm here. And I want to thank Carmen for inviting me. Introducing garden socks. Now we're going to get into the applications. This is what I really came to show you. This is the first flexible planter that can be shaped, kicked, prodded, pressed into shape, and still grow stuff nearly anywhere. And I mean anywhere, as long as there's sunshine and water and you have a good growing media, composted growing media. So these are some examples and designs, but that's what it looks like. It's just a sock, but it's a tighter weave sock that we fill with not the mulch. We use the finer compost, half-inch minus compost, and we fill the sock, the garden sock with it, and we plant right in the composted material. We don't add additional soil to it. We are growing truly in half-inch minus compost. Anyone can do it. This is the garden girl out of Cleveland, Ohio. She actually, if you go online, you can Google her name, the garden girl, and she has videos of her setting up urban gardens with these socks. So here's the sock. It's just simply a containment system, but it has some unique properties. We take the growing media, like you have here in Tijuana, and the major advantages are we can set up a garden in socks within 30 minutes, a half hour, very quick. No tools are needed. There are no weeds because you kill the weeds when you composted the material. If you compost correctly, you destroy weed seeds and you destroy pathogens, organisms that will kill the plant. So we control those through composting. We put it in the sock and it lowers the maintenance required. You use locally produced. Like I said, we are not a compost producer. If you're going to do garden socks in Tijuana, you use Tijuana compost, not compost from somewhere else. You reduce disease, and believe it or not, the handicapped and elderly have and we'll show you some examples of how easy it is for them to access this, as well as children. So here's some examples of sock right here, just laying it out. And here's a pallet. We usually put about 2 to 3 feet because compost is pretty heavy. So if you make it bigger than that, it's hard to carry. So you don't want it to be difficult to carry, so you make them smaller. And we stack them. So here they are in a wheelbarrow. I'm going to go through this quickly, a lot of slides. There he is putting it out. There he's laying it down. We put plastic underneath a lot of times, but you can use other materials simply to keep the contaminated soil underneath that may have disease organisms or weed seeds from growing into your sock. Then we put mulch over the top of it so it becomes a permanent walking area. Agriculture. You can use it in commercial agriculture, locally produced food, food safety. It's organic, the food quality is increased, nutritional value is increased. We have studies to show this. Lower production costs. It reduces weeds and diseases and pests because the plant is healthier, and you have access to a high quality growing medium. So here are some herbs grown in socks, 25 varieties of herbs. We've tested hundreds of varieties of vegetables and plants. Here's for organic vegetable production. I said they're segmented, and you can see the drip tape right to the top. We can put drip tape in there and set it up on a timer, and it'll get irrigated on a little timer, just a source of water. So here it is in a greenhouse or a hoop house structure. Here's some more. See the drip tape right there? There's the drip tapes there. Here's some more examples of layouts in hoop houses for organic production. Here's direct seeded lettuce. Food safety and quality. Just that fabric with the strawberries, they can't get any disease organism on because they're laying right on the fabric to actually stay cleaner. So it's easier to keep your produce clean. Commercial growers. Here's 14 acres were planted, 250,000 linear feet of garden sock, or 70 truckloads into a production system here. This was back in the eastern United States. We're just starting to introduce it into California. I'm working with the former Secretary of Agriculture in Orange County, just north of San Diego, A.G. Kawamura, Orange County Produce, and we are going to be planting organic farms on top of the tarmac, the concrete runways from the old El Toro Marine Air Station. So we're going to take land that was not being used for anything and grow organic vegetables on it. Best food you get. These are important: flavor, size, color, nutrition, and better quality. We also have children's curriculum, educational curriculum, part of the National Gardening Association in the United States. So Filtrix in schools, the easy way to garden. Children love it because they don't have to do any digging. You don't have to get them out there weeding. You don't have to get them out there hoeing weeds and doing all that heavy labor. They can just enjoy watching a plant grow. But in more important needs, you can teach them all kinds of lessons. Working in the garden promotes the improvement of social skills such as cooperation, self-confidence, and community pride. So it's very good at that. It also eliminates most of the obstacles that educators face when gardening with children, such as tilling the garden, minimizing weeds, and the garden fits in any space. You can do it on the parking lot at the school as long as you have sunlight and water. And there you can see, there's pavement right there. It's going right on top of the pavement. Using compost in school gardens provides opportunities for scientific exploration and understanding of the natural world. Our educational curriculum is actually a science curriculum, teaching them important science lessons at an elementary school level. It works. It's easy to fill. You can do your own. You can buy from us, or you can make your own with just PVC tubing and fill the socks on your own if you need to. And these are just some examples of different ways people are using them in the produce they're making. The urban municipal drivers. In many urban areas, we have contaminated soils. We have expensive remediation costs. For 1 acre of tarmac at the air base in El Toro, it costs $40,000 just to remove the concrete. No grower is willing to do that before he grows something, so they just say, forget it. They just leave the concrete there. Vacant lots, food deserts, places where there just isn't available food, you can grow it there. No soil, grow right on the pavement. And heat islands. By growing on pavement, you actually cool the entire environment. Here's an example of urban gardeners cope with contamination. These are some of the contaminants you will find in urban environments that you have to deal with. We provide an easy fix for that. We can separate, put plastic on top of that contaminated soil and grow a garden right on top of it. So here's an example. This is a typical building cleared for community garden. And typically, if it does not work, it is too much work. Meaning they just give up and they stop gardening. You've got to keep it easy. This soil is bad quality, it did not work, so the people will typically just give up on gardening and say it's too much work. So you can lay it right here. This guy just laid it right on his grass lawn and watered it with a watering can. Here's different communities working together, putting in community gardens. We have the Filtrix Foundation that does nonprofit work with communities, low-income communities, to help them establish community gardens to feed people that are in need of assistance with their food bill. Here's a Somali Bantu community in Syracuse, New York, and they just put in traditional rows in that case. But this is what a typical garden would look like with the different crops. And here's the big point, it's easy. That's what we want. We want easy. Local food, the triple play. It's locally produced, it's safer, you know where it comes from, it's organic, and it's more nutritional. USDA showed food grown in the Filtrix system had 40 to 50% more food value than in conventional soils. Why? The organic matter feeds that plant much more effectively than just any soil that we've just dug up. The history of stormwater. Now we're going to move into the market that I spent a lot of time in. This is how Filtrix became known, really. The agriculture and the gardening is a new area for us. This is actually where most of the Filtrex products in the United States are used in stormwater pollution prevention. In 1969, there was an outbreak of fires on the Cuyahoga River in Ohio, Cleveland, Ohio. It was so bad that the US EPA was formed because of that, and they passed the Water Pollution Act 3 years later. This was actually why the EPA came into existence, because we contaminated our water so bad, the Americans could no longer ignore it. They had to do something. EPA started the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System, the NPDES Phase 1. And then they created 9 years later Phase 2. These are just regulatory regions for regulating the quality of the stormwater in different, either in municipalities or in cities and what have you. The enforcement started Phase 2 in 2003, and the total maximum daily load started. You know what the total maximum daily load is? How much contaminated pollution like heavy metals and bacteria do you have in your receiving bodies of water? What they're doing now in California is they're actually requiring everybody to start sampling the water for pollutants and doing something about it instead of just talking about it. So here's what started in 1969. That's what we did to the river, the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland, Ohio. You can only imagine the damage to that river. That started the Clean Water Act in the United States. Along comes our filter stock in 2003, actually, is when we started pushing this, about 10 years ago. And what we do is we use remember I said the composted mulch, the thicker, heavier stuff. And if you look at that under a microscope, you'll notice it's very nooks and crannies that capture all that sediment, and all of those pollutants will get captured in it. So as we move, so the short and sweet is the silt sock, or the compost sock, is a mesh tube filled with the filter media made from compostable feedstocks, which you call residue, organic residue. It's all natural, very good at filtering polluted water, just like nature, and highly reliable. And now you can stay compliant with all the regulations. So these are some of the organizations that support the use of compost for stormwater pollution. The primary applications of this filter media, the compost, are perimeter control for sediment, inlet protection, check dams, slope interruption for slowing the water down as it comes down the slope. So here's the sediment control for perimeter. This is what you'll see, the green sock in California. Higher performance, faster installation, less maintenance, and quicker removal than silt fence. Here's another example of it. Here are surface applications. Notice this is on asphalt. You can do it on soil, concrete, asphalt, grass, tree, and root zones. It's so heavy that it just flattens out and it filters that water without the water running underneath it, which is what will happen with a lighter product. Here it is, high flow rate. In this case, you want the water to go there, but you want the contaminants to stay outside. You do not want to block that inlet. That inlet was put there for a reason, to get the water off the street or the parking lot. If you block it with like a straw bottle, what will happen is you'll create flooding out here. Now what do you have? You have a more dangerous situation of hydroplaning in cars getting out of control. So you want the water there, you want the sediment and the contaminants on the outside. The mulch filter sock allows the water to go where it wants to and keeps the contaminant in the sock. Here are the double stacking to get more. You can see the sediment right there. Here's another one, over 2. Here it is as a check dam to filter the water as it goes down the channel. It's easy removal. You can just cut the sock and spread the landscape mulch after you're done and just dispose of the sock. Or you can go with a biodegradable cotton sock and use that and just leave it there and let it decompose. And it's high performance. A compost sock, in every test I have seen, will outperform any other sediment control best management practice that we've seen. That's through the University of San Diego State University did the studies, as well as US EPA and the USDA. all of them confirm compost is the #1 control for sediment. And yet, do you see anybody using it? Not really. Amazing, isn't it? So there's an example of it, concrete and asphalt. Sediment traps, I use these very effectively. When you see these, we just stack them up because the more water you have to filter, the larger the filter has to be, right? So let's look at some filters. You can pyramid stack them. 3, 2, 1, just like a pyramid. No excavation, just lay them down. They're heavy. We'll stake them into the ground. But other than that, you don't have to excavate the soil. Here's one 42 inches high. This is one I built in Carmel in San Diego County. That was after 2 storm events. That's 3 feet of sediment hitting a 4-foot pyramid stack. And what's important is maintenance. After you get that much sediment trapped, you've got to get rid of it or it'll just keep coming over. So you've got to go back in there and excavate that. You do have to maintain your sediment control devices. They just don't put them in and then walk away. You don't leave them there without maintenance. So make sure you get that out so that the next storm comes, it can continue to trap that sediment. How's that for a sediment trap? That's back east where it rains 3 to 4 times more than here in California and Mexico, Tijuana. So they just build the large ones there for large amounts of water. Slope interruption, less undermining, going under the sock, and no trenching required. You don't have to dig them in because they'll lay it and flatten out. And here it is on the slopes. And the road to clean water gets rid of man-made pollutants. Sediment is the nation's number one pollutant. Why is that? It's just soil. What's wrong with soil floating around in the water? Here's the lesson. That sediment, that loose soil, is charged electrically, meaning every contaminant, whether it's copper from your brake pads on your car, will attach to the sediment. So if you trap the sediment, you trap a lot of pollutants that are floating around in a rainstorm, a rain event. So sediment carries with it heavy metals, bacteria, nutrients, all kinds of things that will attach to it. So if you trap the sediment, you clean up your water, and that's what we do inside the sock. So we can trap things like, let's go back. Hydrocarbons, oil, diesel, and gas. Hydrocarbons, extremely effective. You can get 98% removal of diesel just from filtering it through compost and mulch. And what's even more interesting is the compost and mulch will deteriorate and degrade the hydrocarbons into CO2 and water. The organisms that you use to make compost are the same organisms that eat diesel, oil, and gasoline. They use it as a food source. Nutrients, bacteria, metals, heavy metals, a big one, zinc and copper from brake pads, lead from paint. Damage from erosion and sediment control costs just in the United States $400 billion a year damage. You think it's worth paying attention to? Invisible pollutants, the ones you don't see, like the heavy metals and the nutrients. Here's one right there, an oil slick. Many rivers have the leading pollutants as hydrocarbons, oil, diesel, and gas coming from cars. So we can add to the mulch natural adsorbents that increase the ability of the filter medium to grab a hold of chemically the contaminants and hold them inside the sock. So we'll add things to it. Let me show you some data. We call the sock, when we add things to it, we call it an enviro sock. And what it does is all natural additives. We use it for post-construction applications, municipalities, industrial sites, coastal areas, agriculture, and many more. Here are some examples of sediment removal. This is 98% removal of total solids. Turbidity is about 25. This suspended solids is about 60 to 70%. Look at the motor oil removal with a compost sock, 99%. This is USDA data. This is not our data. We don't do our own testing. We have the USDA and the EPA test it for us. Here's the pollutant removal using enviro socks. Total suspended solids, 80%. Turbidity, the cloudiness in the water, 63% reduction. Total nitrogen, 35% reduction. Ammoniacal nitrogen, 35%. Nitrate nitrogen, 25% reduction. Total phosphorus, 60%. Phosphorus is what turns the water green with algae, because the algae loves phosphorus. Unfortunately, it's too often in our water from fertilizers and what have you. Here's total coliform bacteria, 98%. E. coli from livestock or from human waste, 98% reduction using a compost sod. Metals, 37 to 78% depending on the metal. Oil, 99%, diesel, 99%. Do you think we should be using compost to clean up our water? These are the different applications. Inlet protection, highways, check dams, channels, and it comes pelletized. You can fit it to whatever. The last segment, I'll leave you alone, is we can build things with compost socks using a growing media. So we're going to look at places where we've lost the soil. Right here, that whole thing just slipped down the hill. What are you going to do? How are you going to get that to stabilize and keep it from ending up in this lake? Well, we can come along and we can stack the socks and wrap them in a geogrid or a geotextile material that locks it on that hill. This is 12 days later. 6 weeks after the installation, that's what that slope looks like. That's with the growing media and grass seed inside the sock. The sock stabilizes the slope, then the vegetation comes and finishes it off. We call it nature's Velcro. This is 18 months later after that. You don't see the sock, it just stays there. It's inert and it just disappears and becomes part of the landscape underneath. Okay, we have a booklet that has 25 different designs. It's called the Sustainable Cycle Booklet. It's all based on compost utilization. So if someone says to you, well, we have compost, we just don't know how to use it, tell them to get a copy of this book because there's a lot of designs to solve these problems. Filtrix helps nature do what man cannot in hundreds of environmental applications across a broad client base, using annually renewable, locally recycled organic materials in a patented system based on sound scientific research. Thank you so much. I'll be around afterwards if you'd like to talk.